Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 106th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I'd like to talk about energy cycles. Now, what do I mean by energy cycles? So it's basically the path that energy takes going from the smallest parts of the universe, the micro, to the macro, and especially from dense energies to subtle energies. So, if you've watched my previous videos, I've updated my model of the universe to say that basically in the middle here you have life, or here you have infinity, here you have nothingness, zero. Life, which is the living cell, which is at the center of it all. And then there is a kind of a mirror logic here, where in the micro and the macro, when you step up from nothingness, you get vibrations. When you step down from an infinity, you get multiverse. A multiverse which is um, made of pure vibrations. Then the multiverse structures itself even more further into universes, and step up from vibrations, you get photons, which is a self-contained sort of black hole wrapping vibrations around itself in a toroidal fashion. Step down from universe, you have like galaxy clusters, and here you have like quarks. I think here you have galaxies. You have subparticles, atoms, solar systems, molecules, planets, and in the middle you have life. And then sort of consciousness then grows from here, and then on planets you then have human beings. On solar systems you have space civilizations or star child or whatever. In galaxies you have like galactic consciousnesses. So it's basically consciousness that embraces more and more of the universe by knowing itself through more and more sophisticated forms, and at the same time reaching down and controlling more and more of the smaller elements that it is a part of. And so human beings at their most conscious have control over their cells, biology. A planetary consciousness made of humans has a consciousness ability to sort of manipulate molecules in chemistry, which is why it can make a lot of miracles. When humans gain control over their biology, it's basically an infinitely powerful sort of placebo. You could think of it that way. Power of the mind over the body. But it's not the power of the mind over the body in the sense that it can even alter the chemical processes. It can only affect the biological processes. That is as far as a single human can go. And then if a human nests itself under a planetary consciousness and is totally aligned with acting and behaving and recognizing that it is a part of a larger whole, then it also sort of inherits the ability to manipulate, even reaching down to its chemistry. But that is only if that human behaves and acts in a way that is in accordance with that higher being that it is a part of. Um, just like your cells in your body have powers or abilities that single unicellular organisms don't have. They don't have access to the same kind of energy, the same kind of healing. And then when you're part of a solar system, then you have control over your atoms via behaving again like a part of a global organism, which itself is a part of a higher organism. And then you can probably do things like teleportation, because you're controlling things at the level of the atomic level. And so you could basically disappear somewhere and reappear somewhere else, reconstitute your atomic structure. I mean, really it gets, really fancy at these levels. And of course, if you take this to the absolute, then you get more and more subtle and evolved consciousnesses, which can manipulate even light, and then you get things like spirit and souls, and things that are very etheric, because they don't need a body anymore. They can directly reach to these constitutive elements. But the topic of my video was the energy flow, let's call it flow rather than cycle, between all of these levels. And in a previous video, I basically said that the universe is, it kind of has an endured existence. Well, first of all, because it's like a self contained bubble where everything observes everything else from within it. And as I've said, like the initial energy of the Big Bang is simply like the focus of a universal consciousness on the question of what would I be if I weren't that which I am, which is infinity and nothingness at the same time. And by focusing on that question, it manifests everything that can exist between zero and infinity, that is not part of zero and infinity, because that universal consciousness is the all. The all, which of course includes all of this, but it cannot experience them as separate from itself. So it's like it cannot sort of extract the idea of the human out of itself to test it. It's just not possible for that universal consciousness, God, whatever you want to say. And so it wonders, what would it be if it wasn't what it is? And so it creates what it isn't, which is something limited, finite, from a state where it is unlimited and infinite. And this is actually, for it, from its point of view, this is all so wonderful because it's magical. I mean, you're watching the most exciting movie. You don't even know yourself what's going to happen, because within you, you have every possible beginning, ending, every possible alternative. So you have no idea what that kind of self managed creation is going to choose for itself to experience. And of course, every experience is interesting from its point of view. Just like when you're watching a movie, you're not particularly sad that when you have a war scene or something, it's exciting. Everything's exciting. It's an adventure, because you understand that nobody really died, or nobody really, suffered in that movie. And it's the same from this point of view of this universal consciousness, because there is the eternal part that never dies, is the initial energy that was imbued into this creation when this universal consciousness asked that question and created the universe. It's what we call the souls and all that. It's basically this focus and attention that you give to something, and that focus, that attention, that concentration on that question breathes life into this parallel, this reality. And then it's just an exchange of that eternal energy that happens within it. And that sort of bubble of creation will exist as long as that energy is self-contained, and all of the consciousnesses are focusing on things within the bubble rather than without. When all the consciousnesses start focus their intention on the outside again and stop living in the illusion of separation, then the whole boundary between infinity and finiteness sort of pops, and the finite becomes infinite again. and then that process can repeat again. And of course, we're very far from achieving that. Giving, I mean, right now, as you're watching this, for instance, you are focusing on a finite explanation where you have time that is flowing, where you have sequences in my explanations from beginning to end. And so you're very much focused on a tiny, like really, really insignificant fraction of the whole, of the infinite, of the all. Um, and by doing so, actually, by giving attention to my video, for instance, you are actually sending me energy, or sending this video energy if you want, by your attention, by your focus. And in the previous video, I said that everything thinks everything else into existence, or into experience, rather. Hmm. That is just like you think of something, that thing, like you think of an angel, the angel thinks of you, and then you also think about a rock, and rock thinks about something else, and all of these kind of points of focus or thinking consolidate the creation every step of the way. Every time, like every moment, like time evolves, and your focus is what cements the next moment of the now, just as much as everything around you cements your endured existence by observing yourself. Like everything observes everything else, everything thinks everything else into existence, or into experience, sorry, because existence is, of course, this, and everything exists. It's just that not everything is experienced at the same time. Um, so this was a bit of an oversimplification. There's something to it, but it's the thinks that is a problem, because a rock doesn't really think, an atom doesn't think either. But there is a kind of like this consciousness, this focus and this attention, and this observation translates itself into various forms, different takes different forms depending on these levels. And you have an energy flow from smallest to like micro to macro, and then from macro to micro. Now, the human being is really an interesting case because it it's really the bridge between subtle energy, the non-material, non-physical, and the physical. So what humans can actually do is they eat, like they breathe air, oxygen, they eat and drink, and also maybe a bit of like sunlight, prana. And so these things combined is you're nourishing yourself from light, from molecules, from cells also when you eat meat and stuff. So you're feeding off of the physical, and then what do you use that fuel, that energetic fuel for? For, among other things, thinking. And so your thoughts is, we're saying food for thought, but here it's thought as food. Let me write that down. That's funny. Thought as food for the level above. Like, for instance, angels, spirits, ETs. I mean, all of the beings or the consciousnesses that reside in higher, quote unquote, realms, or in subtler realms than the human, um, are actually feeding off of these thoughts. That is what gives them energy. And that's why we're talking about, for instance, the concept of thought form as really, as really a key concept, because humans, if enough humans consistently think about the same thing, they give birth to an autonomous being that derives its properties and thinking and personality and everything from the collective thoughts of the people that created it. So that's why countries actually have an existence as an independent being, as a being. And they have their own personality. And that personality is simply the sum total of all the thoughts of all the humans living in that country about what they think about that country, what they breathe life into that country in a subtler, non-physical, in the subtle or non-physical realm. And then, of course, the human also sort of breathes energy into all of these elements below by planting trees, by building houses. Um, so, this is something that might come as very shocking and weird, but take a planet, for instance. What would a planet look like before life emerged in the universe? No life. There are only molecules. Well, in my view, it would resemble a kind of a ball where these molecules would be distributed almost uniformly, with no kind of there wouldn't be this what some would call chaos, for instance. Like, for instance, oceans and tornadoes and all kinds of cataclysms. There wouldn't be mountains, there wouldn't be continents that would move. I mean, what breathes life into a planet is life. The moment that life emerges, sorry, it breathes life into all of the elements of the universe. They sort of inherit some of the properties of life. So, without life, what I believe is that, you know how when you put in a bottle, you put big rocks and sand, and that even if you mix them up, at some point the sand sinks to the bottom and the rocks, end up on top. There would be a kind of a natural process where the planets would just be very smooth sort of layers of these different molecules depending on their density, and it would all be very orderly, very smooth. So you wouldn't have any kind of mountain ranges or rocks, or it would all be very smooth and uniform. But as soon as life appears, it's almost as if it it artificially kinds of mixes everything up here, mixes up chemistry, mixes up molecules, and it creates planets that are as beautiful and varied and diverse as we are. And so, why I'm talking about this is because ultimately the energy exchange is life draws energy from the molecules to feed sort of higher beings like ourselves or like animals, um, and at the same time, so it draws energy from the lower levels to feed and energy into creating beings like us, but then it gives energy to the levels below to shape them into things like mountain ranges and oceans with actual, like, things happening in them, and not just like a flat um, water where there's no movement, nothing. um, Life kind of animates the entire universe, where before, to me, it's something very static, or, well, quite static at least. And it might seem very abstract like this, but then go to the human level and suddenly it becomes intuitive. What does the human do? It takes all of this, and then with its energy, like, it feeds off of this. And part of its energy, of course, goes to the subtle realm, but part of the energy is going back to the material realm, and suddenly it mines the mountain to create, houses, to create boats, to make roads, um, to build cities, all kinds of things. And so you can think of, and of course, before the human, all these things weren't there. They were in a state which was definitely not as complex of an arrangement as a house or as a road. They were just raw materials that are scattered in a certain manner. And so if you remove life, that scattering becomes even more granular, and you end up with planets that are very, very orderly, with just layers of molecules, very in an orderly, very orderly fashion. Um, and so that's kind of this energy flow. And then, of course, from the higher realms, you'd say that, like, the Buddha or something, they would have a thought that would create an entire universe from the micro, for instance, the macro, and then that energy goes back up to the Buddha as the thoughts sort of become more and more subtle. And this there's a whole energy sort of flow between the micro and the macro. um, and so essentially then, this is something that will also probably shock you. The human, what is the human? This is the form, the interface that we see. And when you're shaping things with your hands, for instance, when you're moving rocks around, or when you take a chisel and you carve a piece of wood for it to resemble like a tool or a car, that is the sort of the visual representation of an energy exchange of, like, you're just a bundle of self-conscious energy, and you are transferring part of that energy into another bundle of energy for it to take a certain form. And it just takes the form of the interface that you're seeing, like, you taking a chisel and chiseling away a piece of wood. But what's really happening is just a sort of an exchange of information between two bundles of energy. So, I have this metaphor where, imagine a planet, and at the core of the planet is actually where um, all of these higher consciousnesses, like animals or humans, truly reside. And what I mean by this is that it's as if at the center of the planet there was a very powerful electromagnet, which was split into billions and billions of submagnets, let's say. And those submagnets are actually beings. They give themselves that kind of form. Then they project themselves outside of the planet. They give themselves a form when they're really all residing inside the planet. And you know this little exercise where you have, like, for instance, you put little pieces of metal on a plate, and then you put a magnet underneath it, and you move the magnet around, and then these pieces sort of arrange into a pattern, like they take on a certain pattern when the magnet is there, and sort of it acts on the matter that is scattered, like the little um, pieces of metal that are on that plate. Well, imagine that humans, animals, plants are tiny little magnets that are inside the planet. Tiny little magnets that you would call life. Life is like just a sort of it's almost like a, here's a new definition of life: a self aware magnet or electromagnet. Self aware magnet. So it's a magnet that has its own kind of free will, if you will, or it can just act on its own. And then it sends energy um, onto, like, the surface of the planet, which is constituted of molecules, for those molecules to take a certain shape. For instance, the shape of a body, the shape of a human. And then it also can then send energy in the electromagnetic form to transform other molecules into houses, cars. Um, and so that's why, certain spiritual people are saying that you are creating your reality. In a sense, what you're doing is like you are actually molding um, an energy, or a form which is molecular and is nice and smooth, and nothing is sort of as sophisticated and complex. And with the power of your thoughts, your mind, or whatever you want to call it, you then shape it to take a certain form. It's as if, like, before the human was there, instead of this house, there was just a uniform distribution of all the molecules and atoms contained in that house, um, that were arranged in a very orderly fashion. And then the human looks at it, and poof, all of these things sort of arrange, they assemble themselves into a house. And us humans are simply visualizing intuitively through this interface that we have with reality our power of influence over these parts. And that power right now is quite low because you have to go through the whole building of bricks and taking in people that will actually build the house brick per brick. And it will take months and months. And that is just the interface, the practical interface for visualizing a process where you're just sending continuously this thoughts energy, or electromagnetic energy, or whatever you want to call it, to shape the things around you into a certain form. And of course, you give yourself a certain amount of rules and processes for channeling that energy, because if you could just mold anything with your thoughts, then it would create chaos. And so it's as if you put all kinds of rules in here, to and conditions and limits for you to be able to mold things. So, for instance, you're projecting your thoughts to create a car, and then you put a rule that you have to create certain parts first, and then you have to have a factory, and then you have to study and become an engineer, and you have to have workers, and blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the process, you have your car, and that car is it's like your thoughts, the power of your thoughts that is the combined uh, whole process for creating it is what keeps that car together. Otherwise, all of the um, sub parts of that car, all of the molecules of that car, all of the atoms of that car would naturally decompose and arrange again, just in the same way as that thing with the bottle experience with the sand and the rocks. It would just naturally degrade and decompose. And actually, that process is happening anyways. It's called, well, people call it, scientists call it entropy. But entropy is just the how should I say, like the end result or effect, the visual effect of the limit of the power of thought, of human thought, to shape reality around it, and sort of stabilize it into appearing as a house or appearing as a car. When in reality, if humans weren't there to look at it, it would all just, just like decompose basically, as the energy of the thoughts that are continuously projected onto that car sort of disappear. And so the car would resume whatever shape those atoms can take when nothing is happening to them, just the same as if you remove the magnet from under that plate, the little parts of metal there would resume taking a rather standard kind of form. They would revert to whatever kind of initial form they had before the magnet was acting upon them. And that's what we call entropy. But it's not really entropy, it's the power of thought to shape reality around you. Um, and of course, this is the energy flow, basically. And we are also receiving energy from the subtle realms, all of the angels, entities, beings, whatever, that are focusing their energy and their awareness and their attention upon us, um, are are sort of helping us to to exist. And so that's why I'm saying that everything is kind of interdependent and interlinked. Like everything feeds everything else, but just in a different way. It's not everything thinks everything else into existence. That is only from the human perspective, of course. But there is a sort of an energy exchange where it's not necessarily energy in the form of thought, but energy nonetheless. Like um, electromagnetic energy in the form of thought for humans, and then it might be electromagnetic energy in another form for atoms, for instance. But that's also why, for instance, and this is very interesting, you have like a washing machine, and some of these washing machines can break very quickly, others not. And it all depends on how you treat the objects around you and what your thoughts are with regards to that object. So, for instance, the combined thoughts of all the workers in a factory producing a car and the engineers that created it, if they are aware of programmed obsolescence, for instance, their energy, their collective thought resides therefore in the car. And it's almost as the car, don't forget that you have thought forms, and therefore the car acquires a sort of a self-awareness of its own, which is the combined thoughts of all of the workers of a factory that created that car. So if they are aware of a flaw in the car, if they are aware of programmed obsolescence, then that car will be less reliable because it contains those thoughts, it contains those intentions, it contains that energy in it. But the human, the owner of the car, can also make a difference. If it sends really good vibes to the car and good energies and stuff, then that will make the difference between a car that has programmed obsolescence that will break after a year and one that will break after 3 years. And so don't underestimate the power of your thoughts on the things that surround you. When your computer breaks down, or when you have a buggy software or whatever, understand that there is part of it is due to the people that programmed it, but part of it is your own influence as sort of this electromagnetic energy or whatever, and thoughts that you're sending that computer. Like, for instance, my father always says that he's terrible with computers and it's driving him nuts and he doesn't understand them and it's frustrating and they always pop, these things happen and things break down and stuff. And he has problems with his computer that I've never, ever had with my computer. And it's not due necessarily to the software, it's not necessarily due to the hardware. It's just that with that kind of thought form, he will inevitably manifest and influence that computer to be buggy in one way or another. It's just bound to happen because his thoughts are so powerful that even the best computer could not solve that. Or else it would have to be a computer that, people would have to counter his thought form with their own thought form in on how reliable that computer is. And then the interplay between his thought form and their thought form then creates something unique, a unique experience where it's neither as extreme as my father would put it, where computers just break down randomly, but not as stable as these engineers that designed the computer would make it believe. And that's also why, for instance, you say that we've improved, for instance, the early airplanes would be less reliable than modern airplanes. And we think that it's because, well, I mean, we've done technical progress. Well, yes, but especially more important than the technical progress is that the thoughts and beliefs of all of the people on the planet now are aligned with the fact that airplanes are reliable and stable and whatever. At a time where people thought that flight was impossible, most people on the planet thought that flight was impossible. It's as if they were radiating from within the core of the earth these little magnets of thoughts that are actually humans when they take form on the planet. They're radiating their beliefs and their thoughts on these machines that these people would build, and it's almost as if they were making them unreliable, making them fall after or having technical problems. And that's why, when you have a new invention, it's best to just be surrounded with people, only people that have faith in your experiment, and then gradually sort of opening it up to other people. Because so long as you're doing it in your secret lab, you can do miracles because you're kind of removing yourself from the influence of these magnets of thoughts that are sabotaging your belief system and your thoughts. And that's how you can have Tibetan monks that levitate on, a random mountain somewhere in the Himalayas, because there's no one sending them um, a sort almost like an interference pattern with their thoughts to prevent them from doing what they want, like levitating. And that's also why when you have these people like Bruce Lipton and all these people that say that you can heal yourself and all that, they're correct. But what I think they underestimate is be careful when you want to trumpet that to the rest of the world. For instance, if you have a terminal disease and you heal through a miracle, and then you absolutely want all of the doctors in the world to recognize that miracle, and you go knocking to every single door and you show them all the evidence and tell them, look, I've healed, I've healed, I've healed, they will send you very negative thought forms that'll say, that's impossible, that's impossible, that's impossible, that's impossible. And your faith and your belief system would better be extremely powerful. Otherwise, you will manifest, or their combined thoughts, if they sort of try gradually convince you, will make you manifest that terminal disease again. And so that's also one thing that should be understood in the spiritual sort of woo-woo community, is that it's not about trying to prove scientifically that miracles exist. And in fact, it shouldn't be, because this is a completely new way of thinking um, about things. And in the previous sort of paradigms, what I call previous paradigms like monotheism or science, the whole point was to convince all of the little electromagnets which take the form of humans to think the same thought forms, so that they would end up creating the same things on the planet, like a car or like a church, cathedral, um, collectively, because they would sort of collectively be subjugated by this one way of thinking, that would put their thoughts together, their energies together, to manifest or manipulate reality to create whatever that paradigm um, allowed them to create, with certain conditions, of course, certain rules. And so science is about sort of agreeing on one way, only one way, on restricting the possibilities for using your thoughts and your power of thought to manifest only with certain rules. Like, you have to use your hands, it has to be physical, it has to be material, you have to go through industry, this and that. And as we move away from science and towards more subtle energies, suddenly we can really maybe manifest things with our thoughts. But we have to make um, a giant leap in the level of our consciousness in order to be ready for that kind of power. With great power comes with great responsibility. That is like just the basic thing. But understand that at our level of consciousness now, if we got rid of science um, as a sort of a limitation on the power of our thoughts, and the methodology or the filters that we put on the way that we use our thoughts to manifest things or to influence reality, for it to take whatever shape we want, we would destroy ourselves. And so science is an extremely good guardrail, serving that purpose. But don't try to vanquish science by imposing your methodologies, your new kind of ways of manifesting, like some of these people like Bruce Lipton and stuff. They're doing tremendous, great work, but it's something that should be personal and adopted at the individual level, um, and a personal choice to opt for that, and not something that you throw into people's faces, like going to a public hospital and saying, "All you suckers, still using chemo, you are, murderers." And look, I've healed myself through prana and meditation and subtle energies and whatever. That's not at all the objective. And you're really mixing up things. It's like science telling monotheism that they should stop praying or whatever. I mean, it's just like a pointless battle between paradigms, and we should really move past that and come to a point where we can personally choose consciously which paradigm for manifestation we want to use in our interaction with reality, how you use your thoughts, and what limitations you place on them for you to use them correctly. For instance, it's the same as like you have ones and zeros in binary code in computer language. And then depending on the interface that you use, whether it's like Windows or Mac OS or Linux, it will manipulate those ones and zeros in a certain way. And the same holds true for monotheism, for science. And it's really important to become aware and conscious of the usefulness of each of these paradigms, each of these limitations for channeling and giving a form to your thoughts. For instance, if you end up in a very subtle realm where there are demons, because of course they exist, because of course we've been feeding energy to them, so they exist, and they're feeding energy back to us, and it's best to interact with them through prayer, to sort of interact with them, and like move away from them, or of their influence, then through the scientific paradigm, because that will never affect them, because they're not material. Science is a great paradigm for interacting with physical reality. It's actually a very good limitation, so long as we don't have so long as we don't have a higher state of consciousness where we will be able to manipulate matter without self-destroying ourselves. And that, again, that power, to me, will only manifest once we've aligned with these identifying as part of a global consciousness and acting as such. So it's out of our reach for now because we don't act like cells in a global organism, but it will be at some point. And so all of this is perfectly staged. So I've gone a little bit outside of my topic with this energy flow. It's quite more sophisticated and dense, all of this explanation. But I hope you found it interesting, especially this concept of us actually just being a tiny little point of consciousness at the center of the planet, which is a big electromagnet that can shape the form of the planet to take another form. Plants do that. Everything that is alive does that. So yeah, I hope you found this video interesting. If you have any questions, remarks, feel free to reach out, and talk to you in the next video.